Hello and welcome to the video. This is part 3 of my 3-part series for memorization, help, and tips for amino acid structures. I advise you watch parts 1 and 2 before this video. Now, we've got a lot to get through for this video, so let's get started. This is aspartic acid. It corresponds to the letter D, and its 3-letter abbreviation is ASP. One other important thing to know about this amino acid, if it ever comes up on a test, is this is one of the 2 acidic amino acids. The structure is a carbon with a COO group attached, and there's only really one kind of trick I know for memorizing this structure, and that is, even though there isn't a D in aspartic, if you soften that T, it kind of sounds like aspartic acid. So you can connect it to the letter D that way. Now we are going to move on to an amino acid that is related to aspartic acid, and that's going to be glutamic acid. Glutamic acid corresponds to the letter E, and its 3-letter abbreviation is GLU. It is also the second and last acidic amino acid. Glutamic acid structure resembles aspartic acid, except that since it appears later alphabetically, it has one more carbon. Namely, glutamic acid structure has 2-carbon chain with a COO group attached. In fact, the trick to remembering glutamic acid structure is that it comes right after aspartic acid, which is why it corresponds to the letter E. To start like those two, I'm sure you're ready to move on to another amino acid, so let's go. This is proline, and yes, I know it looks a little scary, but let me explain. First, it correlates to the letter P, and its 3-letter abbreviation is PRO. Now, let's move on to its structure. Unlike the other amino acids, proline attaches to its basic structure in 2 places, which is what this part is. So the R group of proline is actually just a 3-carbon chain attached to the central carbon of the backbone and the nitrogen of the amine group. To remember this structure, you can imagine the backbone of proline is an arm, and then the R group looks kind of like a flexed muscle that is big because pro athletes have big muscles, and so proline is actually not as scary to learn as it looks at first. Alright, let's keep powering through. This is histidine. It corresponds with the letter H, and its 3-letter abbreviation is HIS. Now, let's unpack this structure. First, remember that this is a shorthand version of this. It starts with a 1-carbon chain attached to this carbon in the upper corner of the pentagram ring. This line here means that there is a double bond between these 2 carbons, and each of them has a single bond to a nitrogen. This last bit gets a little tricky, but basically this last carbon has a single bond to one nitrogen and a double bond to the other. Due to a process called resonance, the lower double bond can switch positions from one nitrogen to the other. I don't have time to properly explain resonance, so if you want to know more or are feeling daring, look it up. But basically, this happens because of electrons being exchanged and shared between the 2 nitrogens and the bottom carbon. As a result, this histidine can look like either of these structures I've drawn. I know that's a lot to take in, but I'm just letting you know of this because it's important to be aware that either way histidine is drawn, it's the same amino acid. One last quick note is that histidine is the 2nd basic amino acid. So, unfortunately, I don't have any tricks to memorize this one, except through rage and force of will. But if any of you have something, please feel free to share it in the comments below. Go ahead and take a moment to calm down a little bit, whether that means pausing the video, breathing, and or screaming, whatever you need to do. Alright, assuming you're ready to continue, let's move on to the next one. This is asparagine, and it corresponds with the letter N. Believe me, I know. And unfortunately, its 3-letter abbreviation does not correspond with the first 3 letters of its name. Instead, its abbreviation is ASN. But there is a reason for this, because if it were ASP, it would have the same abbreviation as aspartic acid. So to help avoid this confusion, they put an N in instead of P. Now its R group has 2 carbons with a double bonded oxygen and a nitrogen attached to the second carbon. The trick to remembering this is that asparagine is almost exactly like aspartic acid, except the OH group of the COO group is replaced with an amine. Alright, let's continue to another one. This is glutamine, and it corresponds to the letter Q. I don't know why, but it does. And its 3-letter abbreviation is GLN. Because again, if it was the first 3 letters of its name, it would get confused with glutamic acid. Since glutamine has a similar structure to asparagine, it has 1 more carbon. Because like asparagine, glutamine's last carbon has a double bonded oxygen and amine group. One thing that can help you remember glutamine is that its name looks kind of like glutamine. So you can remember that it is like glutamic acid, except that it has an amine group instead of an OH group. Alright, we're almost there, just 2 more to get through. This is arginine. It corresponds to the letter R, and its 3-letter abbreviation is ARG. The R group has 4 carbons and 3 nitrogens, arranged in a chain of 3 carbons attached to a nitrogen, and then the last carbon, which has an amine group and a double bonded nitrogen attached to it. Now, the trick to this one is that arginine starts with ARG, which is the sound a pirate makes, at least in many movies. So if you think of this, then you can remember R is like R, which connects to the letter R. Back to being like a pirate, this analogy can also help to remember the structure of arginine, because the last and 4th carbon clings to all the nitrogens, trying to keep them all to itself, like a pirate clings to treasure. One last quick note is that arginine is the 3rd and final basic amino acid. Now you're going to want to prepare yourself, because I have saved the hardest amino acid to memorize for last. Sorry, but in order to go over all the amino acids, we need to go over tryptophan. Tryptophan corresponds with the letter W, which you can remember by thinking of the phrase whip the fan, because of the last syllable fan in its name. Its 3-letter abbreviation is TRP, which you can remember because a test with tryptophan trips you up. It's tripped me up a few times, but unfortunately we're just getting started, so let's move on to the structure. It starts with a carbon, and then it has a pentagram-shaped ring with a phenyl group attached on the side. There is a double bond starting from where the first carbon attached then goes to this carbon. And lastly, there is a nitrogen in the ring attached to that. Unfortunately, you just have to try to memorize the shape and try to connect it with the fact that tryptophan trips you up. Alright, we're done. After watching all 3 videos, you have now gone through all 20 amino acids and have some memorization tips and tricks to help remember them. I hope that you have a great day, and I hope this was helpful to you. Bye.